heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 315, covering the week of June 27th through July 1st, 2022. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. Our YouTube page is invaluable because it has a lot of our lectures, our Abbeville U videos, and if you like those videos, there's a little button underneath the videos, a super thanks button. You can throw a few pennies our way that way. Of course, we do exist on your generous contributions alone, so if you like the Institute, you like the podcast, you like the website, you like all the stuff, the conferences, the webinars, please consider a tax-deductible donation to the Institute. We do appreciate anything you can give. If you can only give $5 or $1, whatever it is, go on that website, abbevilleinstitute.org, A-B-B-E-V-I-L-L-E, A-B-B-E-V-I-L-L-E, institute.org. Click on the donate button and donate to the Institute. Please, that's the best way to do it online. It's the most effective and efficient way to do it is through online donations. So please consider that donation. Also, share our material around on social media. We're not on Facebook any longer, but that doesn't mean you can't share the material on Facebook, so please do that. Rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Let people know you like it. Let people know you really value the Southern tradition. While you're at abbevilleinstitute.org, give us an email address. That way we can keep in touch with you. And you get a free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition by 20 Abbeville Institute scholars. You get our daily dose of Dixie. You get any updates on our conferences, anything that we're doing, any kind of promotional materials, anything like that. Please don't unsubscribe from the email. I know you get one, sometimes 2 a day, sometimes even 3 a day. You might hear from us, but that's the best way for us to keep in touch with you. And again, it's free of charge to you, free of charge to us, and all of your donations go towards helping programs and other things so we don't have to send out mailings through the actual postal mail. So that's a great way for us to keep things going. All right, well, let's talk about the week at the Institute, because we had some really interesting stuff. And of course, if you're paying attention to anything that's going on culturally in America right now, and of course in Richmond, we've seen the destruction of Monument Avenue there in Richmond. And those monuments were put at a sewer treatment plant by the mayor of Richmond. Now, some of those monuments were donated to museums. In fact, in one case, we had the Jefferson Davis Monument donated to the Valentine Museum in Richmond. The Valentine Museum has now put the monument on display as it was torn down. If you've seen the images of this, they took the Jefferson Davis that was painted, toppled over, and that's how they put it in the museum, with a picture of what it used to look like and then that, as a symbol of what America thinks about Jefferson Davis. This is a disgrace. But it's what you would expect from the American education system that has produced the nincompoops that are running around running things in America. And we've got our summer school coming up this next week, starts July 5th. And so if you're going to that and you're hearing this before that, really excited. I'm going to be there, and we're going to have a great program. But the reason we do these summer schools, and the reason we do the Institute, and the reason we exist, is because we are the counterweight to that stupidity. And that's the best way you can describe it. It's just stupid. For many generations of Americans, many decades, even after the war, Americans considered Southerners to be a valuable part of the American experience. Whether you agree with them or not, whether you were from the South or not, it didn't matter. Southerners and the Southern identity and Southern tradition was important to the American experience. And of course, there are always critiques, even in the South itself. Southerners critiqued things that were going on in the South. But regardless, that was an important component of America. What the Valentine Museum has done, and what this assault on Confederate monuments has done, it's opened a door to the left to tear down America. That's the whole point. I said it in 2015 to the Christian Science Monitor when they interviewed me. This was only the beginning. It's not a slippery slope fallacy. We've seen it happen, right? We have Confederate monuments, Confederate symbols come down. What happens next? Well, then they got to take down the founding generation. That's happening. Well, what happens after that? Then you got to take down Lincoln. That just happened. This just happened at Cornell University. Someone complains about Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln comes down. Now, I'm very critical of Lincoln. Lincoln is not St. Abraham the Wise. Lincoln has got major problems. But you know what? His monument should stay there, just as any other Confederate monument should stay there. Any other monument to the Founding Fathers should stay there. These are These are particular parts of American history, and they should all remain, all of them, and everything that they are. Now, the reason that you're having all this, again, is poor education in America. And a nice example of that last week, there was a piece, I think Yahoo published, but it was The Root originally, which is just a laughable journalistic enterprise. But anyways, The Root published this article from one of their senior writers. And in that particular article, she said that the Constitution was written by slave owners, so why should we pay attention to it anyways? And of course, she lists the slave owners. She lists the main authors of the Constitution. You want to know who these people were? John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Tom Paine, and James Madison. Right? I can't remember if she put Ben Franklin in there or not, but regardless, Adams wasn't there, Tom Paine wasn't there, and Jefferson wasn't there. None of those people were there. And of course she said, well, Jefferson and Madison were slave owners, so we can't listen to them. Where she doesn't realize that John Adams actually wrote a pro-slavery constitution for Massachusetts at one point too. And Ben Franklin actually traded in slaves and owned slaves, so he was also a slave owner. Was a slave himself, though, too. The only one of that group, if Franklin was there, I can't remember if he was, but Paine, the only one of that group that was consistently anti-slavery their entire life was Tom Paine. Benjamin Franklin later got on board with that. Jefferson was anti-slavery to a point, and same thing with James Madison. All of them had an anti-slavery component to them, all five of those individuals. But regardless, and then she also said that the 12th Amendment created the Electoral College. I mean, this is the level of stupidity that we have. Of course, you got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sitting on a late-night talk show program saying that the Confederate South was responsible for the Dred Scott decision of 1858, and that forced Abraham Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, you can't make up this kind of stupid. This is what we have passing for political leadership. I mean, and people were going gaga over this. Oh, yes, we got to have her run for president. She has to run for president. When can Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez run for president? Hopefully never, because she's really awful. And she's stupid. I mean, but she's a byproduct of the American education system and what the history departments and curriculum produce. So we had a piece on Tuesday by Paul Yarborough on American education, and it's entitled Pete Hegseth's Hopeful War in Education. Now, Hegseth has got his own issue. Paul Gottfried pointed this out in a piece that he wrote at Chronicles, and Hegseth's moral compass is pretty rotten. But he has written a book, Battle for the American Mind, where he talks about American education. But the problem with this, of course, in Hegseth and all the conservatives out there, is that they don't really realize what they're doing when they do things like the 1776 Commission Report and Straussianism with Lincolnian nationalism thrown in. And Paul does a nice job pointing out, look, there's some problems with this because they operate from a position of northern dominance, of Puritan Yankee dominance. And so everything is New England. It doesn't matter if it's a declaration, that's New England. George Washington's an honorary New Englander. Right? These people are all just New Englanders. They're all just nationalists, and we need a national, one-size-fits-all, top-down situation. And, of course, that has to be directed by our group of people instead of their group of people. The problem with all that is that we can't always control that. So this is the issue I have with this notion of trying to reform the American education system. And I pointed this out. South Carolina passed a law that required universities and colleges to teach the founding documents. They said, well, you know what the real issue here is? This is the conservative mindset and where there's problems with it. The real issue, ladies and gentlemen, is that we don't teach the founding documents in class. Well, okay, I can see that. Yeah, I mean, we have an issue with that. We don't teach the founding documents. But what happens when you require these leftists to teach the founding documents? What are they going to do? Well, it's obvious, and I've had people write me about this. What do? Well, okay, I have to teach the Declaration, so I'm going to teach it as a racist white guy writing down attacks on Indians and blacks, and doesn't include women. I mean, they're going to teach it, but they're going to teach it from a leftist slant. Or the Constitution. Well, it's written by a bunch of slave owners who didn't care about black people because of the Three-Fifths Compromise, and et cetera, et cetera. This is what they're going to do. They're going to focus on certain parts of it and ignore the rest. They don't really know what the Federalism, they don't understand this stuff. They don't understand the Declaration and what it really meant. They don't understand any of these things. They're just going to teach it from their ideological worldview. So what's the difference in teaching it or not teaching it if that's what you're going to get? Now, if what you mean by teaching the founding documents is we want conservatives or we want people that really know what these things mean without all the political spin teaching them, okay, but how are you going to do that? It would be you have to dominate the civics education, which conservatives don't do, right? So you're going to need stuff like this. You're going to need counterweights. People have to have their own perspective on things. I mean, look, back in 1825, John Quincy Adams wanted to have a national university to teach Americanism. And it fell flat. Why? Because the central government has no authority over this. And of course, that's the Department of Education now. But that was the whole point, to have a national university, national education. We teach people the right things, the right stuff, etc., etc. And we know that's all unconstitutional, number one, because it was pointed out then. But the problem with all that is who gets to determine what it means to be an American. Is it South Carolina? Is it Massachusetts? Is it California? Is it North Dakota? Is it Texas? What is it? Is it Montana? Is it Tennessee? Is it Minnesota? Who gets to determine what is an American and what isn't an American? And we know that there are 50 different Americas. There are 50 different Americas. There are 50 American states. There are 50 different Americas. So the real issue is that. And of course, when you start talking about the founding documents, well, what does South Carolina say about the Declaration? How do they view it? What about the Constitution? Should we teach the Constitution in South Carolina from South Carolina's perspective? Should we look at it from Rutledge or Pinckney and these people? Should we go through their ratification process and what they said about it? Is that how we should teach the Constitution if you're in South Carolina? Or what about in Pennsylvania? What if you're in a state that didn't ratify it in 1787? How do you teach it then? Should we talk about their founders of those states? So this education should all be decentralized. And that's the real issue here. The attack on Southern symbols is a national attack coming out of New England or the West Coast. And it's driven by that. So we ran this piece on Monday, an open letter to the Valentine Museum by Bo Trawick. I'm going to read it. It's very short. And we actually had a follow-up piece on Thursday by Valerie Protopappas. But Valentine's, the Trawick piece says, on June 24, 2022, Mr. William J. Martin, director of the Valentine Museum in Richmond, gave notice that the damaged, desecrated, and vandalized statue of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, on loan from the Black History and Cultural Center of Virginia, will be displayed by the museum within its core exhibit. The purpose stated by the Valentine is for building a better understanding of Richmond's history. However, this tells us less about Richmond history and more about Richmond today, and what it shows us of Richmond today is not pretty. Vandalism says, "How dare you be above me?" In the summer of 2020, amidst the rioting, looting, and arson during the mostly peaceful protests over George Floyd's death in the custody of the Minneapolis police, young residents from VCU and elsewhere downtown in the city of Richmond went on a furious orgy of vandalism and destruction of the Confederate monuments for daring to be above them, while the complicit city and state government stood idly by. As Tennyson wrote in his Idyls of the King, "Yea, they would par the mountain to the plain to leave an equal baseness." Only unequal societies have heroes. Egalitarian societies do not have heroes, and cannot, by their very definition. They can only have celebrities. To try to elevate a celebrity into a hero amounts to no more than elevating a pygmy to the top of Mount Olympus. As everyone knows, the Confederacy was an unequal society, and it had its heroes. In the brief 4 years of her war-torn existence, struggling against all odds for independence, her heroes were of a legendary mold. But in these latter days, their monuments came to stand as an indictment against the glorification of the mediocrity of this age, and a rebuke against the great force of entropy that is inexorably leveling society into its lowest common denominator, so that they had to come down to appease the self-righteous, egalitarian indignation of the unwashed woke mobs. The Valentine Museum plans to use the display to bring together, quote, many different perspectives to build a future we can all be proud of. All that is except those of us whose forefathers fought to defend Richmond and Virginia against invasion, conquest, and coerced political allegiance to an arrogant imperialism, just as their fathers had done in 1776. We are the unreconstructed deplorables who will not be gaslighted by presentism and who see clearly the truth of what George Orwell wrote In his dystopian but prophetic novel, 1984, he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. Right. I mean, this is a nice, short little letter, but it speaks eloquently to what is going on right now. This is a war on education, but it's being directed from people who don't really have an open mind or want to tell the story. They have their agenda, and they ignore people that don't fit that agenda. That's not really part of the history. Now you can say, well, the Valentine Museum, well, we have a picture of what it used to look like. This is what it used to look like. This is what it looks like now. Why not put it back the way it was? I mean, we should put these things in museums. Well, why not put the whole monument in the museum? Why not take the whole thing down, build a museum around it, and show these things? If you want to take them out of public squares, put them in a museum, put them. Of course, there's discussion of melting these things down, and they don't really want them anywhere. They want them destroyed, desecrated, vandalized. That's what they want. And so when that's the agenda, that's what you're going to get. And of course, the agenda is driven by a lack of education. And of course, you have a nice piece by, again, Valerie Protopappas wrote this in 2011, holding heritage groups responsible. And she wrote this to the Civil War Trust, the American Battlefield Trust and the Civil War Trust, is a response to their lack of interest in combating against the destruction of Southern monuments and symbols. And this is 2011, so you can see that there was a pushback even before 2015. And people were, look, it began as early as the 1990s. And then, of course, the first event was removal of the battle flag from the dome at the South Carolina State House in 2000. I remember I was there in South Carolina when that happened. And walking out to the Capitol and walking around and seeing the two competing rallies. And I realized at that point, those that supported the flag were going to lose. And they were going to lose because the numbers were not there. And they were going to lose because the other side had the myth of righteousness, right? They had that on their side. And you had celebrities, as Trawick points out, not heroes, but celebrities. You had football players and coaches and people like that who were out there as celebrities saying this thing should come down. And eventually it was brought down to the grounds at the Soldiers Memorial, and then completely removed by Nikki Haley, who again had no tie to the history of South Carolina. So this was always pointed out. Haley's family had only been here a very short period of time. Didn't have any tie to the heroes that had fought under that flag. I was actually guiding a little tour of a cemetery, and I had a student say to me, why they had a battle flag on a grave. Why is that still there? And it was a teaching moment. I said, well, that man died under that flag. That's the flag he fought for. It's the flag he died under. We're in a cemetery. It should be, common sense that flag should be there. And the student said, oh, I get it. Yeah, okay, I understand. And rest in peace. This is his response was amazing, because when you just tell it like that, well, this is the flag that he died under. It makes sense that someone who died under that would admire that flag. Okay, well, then that makes sense. The same student also, we were there was a Confederate general buried in that cemetery. And that Confederate general has a name. His name was on a very prominent military installation. It's going to be removed. And the same student said, well, why are they doing that? And I told him, I said, this is the reason why they're doing it. And he said, well, it doesn't make any sense. So this is amazing that, young people get it. They get it. But the establishment elites don't. And again, this is a failure of education in America. It's a failure of people to tell the stories that matter. And so you can see this in all kinds of things, and even to the piece on Wednesday about Elvis. Right? We had a great little piece, a new movie out about Elvis, written by Aaron Coleman, who actually did a wonderful webinar with us on Anti-Federalist. But he's a huge Elvis fan. And so Elvis, of course, being so important to Southern history and a nice symbol of Southern culture and Southern music, it's nice to have a review of that movie. And he's pretty critical of the movie. And in fact, he would say that you didn't really get much of Elvis. You got more of his handler than anything else, the Colonel. And Colonel's played by Tom Hanks. But you get more of that. And there was an exchange where, Coleman brought up the way that what the movie is trying to do is show that Elvis was so influenced by the civil rights movement and by, of course, gospel music and blues and other things, that it becomes a civil rights movie. I mean, this is what they tried to do with it. Now, Elvis was influenced. Gospel was always his favorite music. Always. Even to the day he died, Elvis loved gospel music. And that comes out of his Southern rearing. That's not racial, it's Southern. And I think that's something we miss in that, how important gospel music is to the South and to Southern people. It doesn't matter if you're talking about white, black, it's important. But he also brings up, B.B. King, and the movie, as Coleman said in an exchange I saw, says that it goes too far in showing the influence of King on Elvis. It just didn't. They certainly respected each other, but Elvis was not that influenced. And so there's some Hollywood stuff in this movie, and again, you kind of lose sight of Elvis and the music. I mean, the music was what made Elvis what he was. He was, of course, a cultural icon. His movies were bad eventually, but he was a cultural icon, and it was this image of the South. I mean, Elvis would not have been Elvis without the South. I mean, the home, Graceland, is a Southern home, 100% Southern. I mean, you can't get around it. It looks very Southern. And so this is Elvis's view of what it meant to make it. It was always with a Southern feel to it, and his music always had a Southern sound to it. So Elvis was, and you get to the 1970s and you look at how important the South was in the culture of the late 70s, early 80s, with things like the Dukes of Hazzard and, of course, Southern music and Smokey and the Bandit and these kind of things. You look at that, right? Burt Reynolds. But Elvis wouldn't have been any of that, I don't think, without Elvis. Elvis made the South popular. And, of course, you had so many artists coming out of the South. I mean, look, the country music scene, we all know. But, I mean, people like Jerry Lee Lewis and, I mean, all these rock and roll stars. Even, if that's just the white stars. The black stars also mostly came out of the South, right? Whether it was Texas or whether it was Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi. I mean, they're all coming out of the South. Florida. So that mark of the South on American culture, I mean, Elvis is just such an important part of that, and you just cannot get around it. But we have all this stuff buried, and so I like the last piece of the week, Marking the Wolf. This is by Travis Holt. He's from Arkansas. He's in Arkansas. I mean, you get Arkansas from Travis Holt. And I'll say this about Arkansas. I love our Arkansas writers on the website. We just had Brandon Meeks on our webinar this last week. And if you attended that webinar, if you missed it, if you're listening to the podcast, if you attended the webinar, you're going to get the replay of it. If you missed it, you'll still get the replay of it if you paid the $10. If you didn't get it and you want to pick it up, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to love it, then you can go to abbevilleacademy.org. And you can pay $15 for it when we put it there. And you get it you download it, it's yours, right? You pay $15 for the webinar. It's about an hour long. And we have all our other webinars up there too. There's, many of them now, over a dozen webinars up there that we've done and will continue to do at the Institute as we move forward. And this is just a wonderful, if you don't listen to that webinar and come away, first of all, loving Southern literature and really liking Brandon Meeks, I don't know who you are. I mean, he's such a nice, positive, polite individual, and he writes these really good and really funny stories that are quintessentially Southern. I mean, they're so good. And so it's wonderful to have him on, and we really like publishing his stuff. But he's from Arkansas, and so is Travis Holt, and we have others, who are from Arkansas. Travis Archie's from Arkansas, and we get this, very Western feel. We've got, the Kennedy twins down there in Louisiana, which is kind of southwest We got Sandy Mitchum, who's also from that area, Southwest. I mean, these wonderful people that come from that southwestern part of the Deep South, and just great people and tell great stories. So this Making the Wolf is about a character that was in Arkansas who was arrested, maybe unjustly arrested, but broke out of prison all the time and kept going to the hills. And finally he died. But Travis Holt tells a story about who this individual was and his fascination with him, and also how he provided a headstone for him. He wanted to go and have some place to mark down where this guy was buried. And it shows you the interest that communities have, even in outlaws. There is a certain part of the Southern culture that's tied into outlaws. John Wesley Hardin is one of the most infamous killers in American history. But he wouldn't have been what he was without the South, and his memoirs are pretty interesting. But he was, of course, captured in Pensacola, Florida, and brought to prison. But you have, and of course, you have Jesse and Frank James. You have the Bonnie and Clyde. You have the Outlaws, the musicians, the Outlaws, which had that kind of that rebel spirit to it. I mean, that's part of this Southern culture and Southern tradition. The backcountry, the guys that are against the centralized power and all these things. That's, in some ways, that's what makes the South pretty fun when you get into that part of it. And we can, outlaws are outlaws for a reason most of the time, and you can say that their moral failings are really despicable. But sometimes an outlaw is an outlaw to one group is not an outlaw to another group, and you do get that in the South. All this idea of Southerners were all traitors. Well, I mean, that's not true. But to the North and to people that hold that position, well, it is true. We can say it's not, and we can use legal language and other things to prove it. But of course, they would just double down on it and say, no, they're outlaws, they're traitors. So it's that rebel attitude, I think, that's always interesting in the Southern tradition. It's kind of fringe belief, it's dissident, it's defiant. And when you look at Confederate monuments again, I mean, some of the dedication speeches did bring that stuff up. So there's always that side to the Southern tradition, and that's why I did like this piece from Travis Holt and some of the things we've done recently with monuments and other things. There's always that to it. There's always that side of dissidence, of defiance. And I've said this before, but I'll never forget an exchange I had with a writer at Time magazine about the Maryland State Song. He was very upset about the Maryland State Song because it's dissidence, it's defiance. Well, that's the key. That's what they don't like. They don't like this idea of defiance or dissidence or anything that thumbs their nose at their accepted vision of what America is. You go back to education, that's what's going on there. You go to music, you go to culture. This is exactly what's going on in this particular situation. So we exist at the Abbeville Institute to provide this counterweight. And again, you can download the free mobile app. I didn't mention that before, but download the free mobile app. Go to your app store and get our mobile app. Your donations help pay for that and keep that going. We have to pay for it. It's free to you, but we have to pay to use it. The website, it's free to you, but we have to pay to use it. So if you do like everything we do at the Institute, that's free of charge. We have so much stuff. The YouTube is free of charge, but the videos that we do cost money. And we're actually going to have a new one come out next week on July 4th, in fact, which I think everyone's really going to love. And it's going to be a tremendous thing for you. So that's part of the things that you do. Your donations help. They help with these videos. We've got more planned. So that's going to be fun. We have the 1607 project, which we're working on, Virginia First. That's still going on in the background. So we're still working on several cool things. And all those things, this podcast, the website, the conferences, the videos, all of that stuff is only possible because you donate to the Institute. And if you don't do that, we stop doing all of this stuff. So please consider that tax-deductible donation. We are halfway through the year. We'll be making big pushes near the end of the year to try to get you to send a little bit of money. Again, whatever you have. I know people email all the time and say, well, I only could give $10. Hey, if that's all you got, I know times are tough, gas is up, people are losing jobs, food prices are high. If that's all you got, we'll take every little bit that you can send our way to help keep all of these things going and help us explore what is true and valuable in the Southern tradition. Until next time, good day.